Hi, it's Stephen here at Bland Designs, and this is a crap video. What I mean by a crap video is that I'm going to create a series of videos where I pull out some products and I just play around with them and experiment and see what I can do with them. And some of the things will turn out to be crap, and some of the things might turn out to be quite successful. So crap stands for creative, recreation, and play. So I kind of made that up. So anyways, this is my first crap video. And in this video, I want to show you how to use Brushos. Now, what are Brushos? Brushos are actually pigment powder, which is used to create paint. They're water-based, and they're little crystals. And when you take them and you apply water to them, they kind of do all kinds of amazing little things. Now, you can buy them individually or you can buy them in sets. I bought a set of about 12, and in a moment I'll show you what they look like. But just to let you know, Brushos have been on the market for over 30 years. They aren't a new product. However, they've had new life brought into them because a guy named Ken Oliver has developed a similar product called Color Burst. And Color Burst is sort of like Brushos in the way they work. I've never used them. Brushos tend to be a little cheaper in price as well, and I think you get a little bit more in a box or in a bottle of these as well. So nothing against the Ken Oliver products. I've never used them. They look pretty much the same, but I found these before I knew about Ken Oliver's stuff. So I imagine what I do with these is going to work the same with the Color Burst. Now you can see I put mine in these little plastic box. It doesn't come with that, and each one is filled with this pigment powder. On the top I put these little colored rings, little swatches that I made, so I know what colors I have in each bottle. There's also a little hole in the top which I punched in with a push pin, and you can open it right up, but you have more of a chance of spilling everything that's inside of it if you do that. So the way I've seen other people use these is that they simply just punch a hole in the top and they use it like a shaker. And I keep them in this little plastic box because it keeps everything sealed up. Other people just put a push pin inside of them and to keep it from spilling out. Though to date I have found that if anything, it's more difficult to get them out of the little hole than it is to spill them. So they come in a variety of different colors. Like I said, I've got about 12 colors here. So I'm going to do several different things with them today and see how this all works out. Part of this video will probably be put into fast forward for certain different sections, but essentially you're going to see my mistakes, the things that worked okay and the things that didn't work okay. One of the things that didn't work okay right off the bat in this video was that I was actually taping this and using my voice at the time of taping, and then I discovered when I got it all done that I had my microphone turned off. So anyways, this is a voiceover and I have to remember what it was that I was doing. So here I've got a piece of ordinary white cardstock and a spray bottle of water, and I'm just going to pick out 3 colors that I'm going to use. And you can see here I've got my handy dandy little paper piercer because as I worked through this video, some of my holes weren't big enough and I had to use that to open them up a little bit further. So I've got yellow, I think they call that lemon, I have a purple, and I have a shade of blue. And all I'm going to do with these is, first of all, no water involved, just the dry cardstock. See, you can see here, this is where I've got to punch the hole in and make it a little bigger. And I'm just using it as a shaker bottle, and I'm shaking some of the powder out. Now, the powder is very fine, and it's not very easy to see when you first put it out. And it may not shake out in the same color as it will turn into. It's actually made up of several colors. There I'm putting the yellow on. I'm going to add a little bit more blue. Saw that more of the yellow came out. They actually are not true colors. They have other colors mixed in with them, which makes them really interesting. So now I've got them all shook out onto my cardstock, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly mist them with some water and watch what happens. As soon as water hits them, they react and they kind of burst in colors. So see, just like that. And the more water you apply, the more they spread out, the more they mix. So you're never going to get the same design twice. So you see the purple there came out, the yellow came out. it's kind of fun because you don't know what's going to turn out. So I'm putting a fair amount of water on this to get them moving about. And my paper is going to warp a little bit, but that doesn't bother me because you can put a heavy weight on top of this later after it's dry and let it sit for a few hours and it'll flatten out. Or you can do what I do, put it through my hot laminator and use it like a pressing machine, and it presses out quite nicely. Now if there's spots that you've missed with the color, you can just add some more, and that's what I'm doing here. Decided I need a little yellow in one spot and just add more water, and you just keep doing this until you get the color that you want. Now you'll notice that I've got a lot of residue on my non-stick craft mat, and that's okay. I'm going to show you a trick with that later, but do make sure you cover up your work area well, because this stuff will stain. So if you get it on your clothes and you get it on your hands, they are going to stain. Now you can get it off your hands pretty easily with a pumice stone or some really good industrial soap, but getting it out of your clothes, not so easy. So I highly recommend that anything you don't want this to get onto, that you cover it well. Now you notice I was blotting it a little bit with a paper towel, and that's okay. I haven't dried it yet. I'll hit it with a heat gun in a second. But you see all that residue that I've got there? I'm just going to add a little bit of water, and this is sort of the Tim Holtz distress ink technique, where he lays the distress ink down on the non-stick craft mat, spritz it with a little water, and then rubs the tag through it. Well, I'm doing the same thing here with the leftover color, and I'm giving it a good press into that, and so there you go. You can see that it's sort of a mottled effect, and you can dry it between layers, and you can add some more. So I call this tag dipping. So that's kind of neat. So if you're working on something, you might as well have a few tags laying around too, or another piece of cardstock, because these will make great backgrounds. Now I've kind of come to the end of the color there, so now it's just turned into mud because the colors are getting mixed together. So I'm just going to do a wipe up, and I usually use a baby wipe. And the thing with the baby wipes is it absorbs the color too, and I don't throw those away either. I let them get all stained with this color, and then I lay them out, let them dry, and eventually, I don't know, you can use them for other things. They're strong enough that you can actually sew on them, and you can use them for backgrounds or for layering techniques or whatever. I'm not sure. I may make another video after this one showing you what I've done with each of the pieces that I made today. And here I'm just wiping up some of the color. I'm just dabbing, but basically once the color starts to soak into your cardstock or your tag background, it doesn't move, so you can kind of take a paper towel and wipe it all over, and that speeds up your drying time a little bit. So I'm going to get the heat gun out now and give that a blast, and that's what I'm doing right here. And as I said, you will find that your tags and your cardstock may warp a little bit, but again, that's probably not really a problem for most people. Now this is all cardstock, and of course the tags are ordinary shipping tags from Staples on Manila, and this works really well. So you can see the potential here for backgrounds, for cards, for tags, for scrapbook pages, whatever. And as I said, you can't duplicate the results in terms of making two pieces look exactly the same, because you don't know how that color is going to react to the water. So giving it a good thorough dry right now, and I think this might be a good place to speed up the video. So next I thought I'd take a look at the permanence of the Brushos. So I've got this dried piece. Now I'm re-wetting it with my spray bottle, and I just want to see if the Brushos will reactivate and move further. And they don't really. So that when they dry, they are pretty much permanent, which makes them probably pretty good for mixed media applications. So then I'm thinking, okay, can I add more color on top of these ones that I did the dip process? And so I've added some water, and I'm putting those on directly with the water. So this is another method you can use that kind of gives interesting results. Rather than put it on dry first, then spritz it with the water, spritz your surface with water, and then shake on your Brushos. So you can see I was giving that a really violent shake there because the camera's kind of moving on that. My hole isn't big enough. So this is something I have to keep doing. I just didn't make the holes big enough. That's all that is. So I'm putting more on, and you can see when it hits the water, it instantly reacts. And I'm just going to add a little bit more water on there and blend it all in as I go through. So that's kind of a technique. So I'll just give that a little bit of a dab here because the water's starting to pool again. But you see, another layer, it adds more color. It's actually pretty good. That tag's looking really good. So bottom line is, I think this would be good in mixed media applications where you're adding layers of moisture, other products where you're using water, that kind of thing, or wet fluids. And I'm just doing a double dip here with that card. Now you can see that's coming out a little mottled, a little bit dirty, but you know, that's not so bad either as a background. That could be a nice vintage background for something, whatever, or a grungy look. So really, it's not something I would throw away. It's something I might use. So as I said, you can see that they are not reactivated once they're wet, so that's good. You can lay down other mediums on top of them. So we're doing a little cleanup here, and I'm thinking, let's try this on some other types of paper. Now, I mentioned before that I don't throw away the baby wipe. Probably reuse the paper towel too if you want to get really creative. Of course, if you're interested in things being archival quality and that kind of thing, then maybe that's not such a good idea. So here I'm giving another quick dry to all of this, and I think this might be another point where I want to. Okay, so now I thought maybe what we should try is black cardstock. Now I'm really not expecting great results with this, but we'll see what happens. I mean, with black cardstock, you really need something that's iridescent for it to show up, and these don't have any shimmer properties. There isn't any mica or anything like in them. They're just dry pigment paint powder, colored powder. So I'm putting a little yellow on, and you can see it at first when I shake it out, when the granules coming up, and you can see this as well too. But watch what happens when I hit it with a little water. It's just going to disappear. It doesn't do a thing. And so, okay, I kind of pretty much figured that was going to happen, but I thought, well, I'll give it a shot and see with what happens here. So now I'm just dapping it up, and that's a piece of crap. Yep, that's a piece of crap. It didn't work at all, so that one's going basically into the garbage. So clean this up. And then I'm thinking, well, what other kinds of papers can I use with this? So, yeah, not going to use that. Throw it away. Clean up here, and let's grab another kind of paper. And I think the next piece of paper I'm going to try, and there's my my baby wipe. As you can see, that one's pretty much totally dyed. And so I'll lay that out and let it dry on another surface. Little flat, and who knows what I can do with that later. But as I said, they're actually kind of strong, so you could probably sew through them. You could probably make them into flowers or something. There's one that I did in an earlier session, and it's pretty much dry now. So a lot of things you can do. You can fold it up. It looks like material. It basically does. It looks like a piece of material. So whatever you might use material for in a mixed media project, you could use this as well. So we're going to put that aside to dry, and I'll grab the other one, get that out of the way. And let's grab another piece of paper. And this time I'm going to try this on watercolor paper. And I'm just looking for that right now. Here it is. Now, watercolor paper, I've got a couple of pieces here because watercolor paper, this is by Ranger. It's the Tim Holtz line of watercolor paper, and I think it's about 118 pound, 120 pound. You can get watercolor paper in a lot of different weights. The thicker the paper, the less chance of it warping. But I'm going to give this a try. They're already pre-cut to 4x6 size, so that's great. One side is rough, one side is a little bit smoother. So you get more texture on one side or the other. So I'm wondering if that's going to make a difference when I use the Brushos. So I'm taking a couple of colors here. I've got a lemon, and I'm not sure what the other color is. And then I've got a red. I think the other color is a lighter shade of yellow. And I'm going to take these and put them on the heavier textured side of the cardstock. And I'm putting them on dry to start with, just like I did with the ordinary cardstock. And then I'm going to give a little spritz of water and see what happens. Now, because it's watercolor paper, it should absorb the color better than the cardstock, and it does. It is warping a little bit, not as bad as the cardstock, so that's a plus. So that's the rough side. So I'm going to use the same colors and do the same method with the smoother side of the watercolor paper. And we'll see if there's much of a difference between the two. Give it the spritz. They're both quite pretty. They both make really nice backgrounds for a card or whatever. You can put them through your die cutting machine for that matter too, and cut out butterflies, flowers, whatever you want. So I'm looking at both of them, and what I'm noticing is that on the smooth one you have less texture. On the textured one you have texture. Hey, logical sense here. So it's just, I guess it's personal preference. The color seems to go on both without any problem, and I'm giving them both here a quick dry. So I would say that this is not crap. This is definitely a technique that has a great deal of potential. So let's skip ahead to the next papers that we're going to use. Okay, these next papers come from Crafter's Companion, and they're called Shimmering Cardstock. And they come in a little package of 6x6s or 8x8s. I think they're 8x8s. And one side of them is kind of got like a glossy, shiny sort of surface to it. You can see the light reflecting off of it. I've cut this one down to 4x6, same size as the other pages that I was using. And I'm going to see how this reacts with the Brushos. Now, I'm thinking the Brushos might not be able to sink into this quite as well as they could into the cardstock or into the watercolor paper. But we'll see. I'm going to try 3 different colors here, and I'm just getting my holes open a little bit wider so I can shake the Brushos onto the card. And I'm going to do the same thing with this that I did with the other samples. I'm just going to shake them out onto the dry card first, and I'm just randomly putting the pigment down. That one's not working very well. Sometimes it helps, I find, if you give it a little bit of a tap. And I see my little swatches that I have on the top of them aren't glued down very well either. They seem to pop off. So that may have not been as bright an idea as I thought before. So give it a good hit when in doubt. Yep. Okay, nope, still not getting enough out there, so I'm going to really take my paper piercer here and just really ream the heck out of that hole to make it a little bigger. As I said, you could open them up and sprinkle them from the open bottle, but more chance of you dumping the whole bunch onto your card than just a little sprinkle, and if that's the case, then you'd have a bit of a problem. So I'm putting on the third color here, and now we're going to spritz it with the water. Later, just make sure I've got the right color cap on the right bottle, so when I glue them down later they'll be correct. And so I'm going to spritz and see what happens. They seem to, on this cardstock, because it's a little slicker, seem to move a little bit faster, spread out a little bit more than they do on the cardstock or the watercolor. So now I'm giving it a bit of a dry here. And as I said once before, this pigment does not have any mica in it or any kind of shimmer powders that I can see. So I'm thinking that once it's dry on this shimmering cardstock, that we'll get a little bit of a shine from that. And looking at it right now as I dry it, it did curl a little bit, so it's not resistant to the curling properties either. But I can already see the lights kind of reflecting off of it, so it's an alternative if you want to make this sort of shiny. Now I'm kind of looking at this, the way that this happened to spread out, and it almost looks like a landscape. In the center you've got some hills in the distance, and it looks like stormy clouds up in the sky, and maybe that's a lake in front, and it's reflecting the sky. You could do something with that. In fact, I think I probably will. I'm just blotting up here a little of the excess that ran down the side, and it doesn't seem to move on the card when I touch it, so that's a good thing. But yeah, this is kind of neat, the way this one's turned out. And I think if I add just a little bit of black pen around certain areas of it, this looks like a little landscape. could frame it. So there's an unexpected sort of result from that. So is this crap? No. Actually, I really like the way the Brushos work on this shimmering cardstock. Now the problem is getting some shimmering cardstock. As I said, that came from Crafter's Companion. And I think I ordered it online. I probably did. But there may be other shimmering cardstocks that you can use as well for this. I'm sure there is. Now, of course, the other thing that I'm going to try is glossy photo paper as well, which has even more shine to it than the shimmering cardstock. And if the Brushos adhered well to this, then I have a feeling they'll work very well on the photo glossy cardstock. Also, I noticed that there's a little bit of residue, the dried powder, and you'll find this on the cardstock as well. So I'm using my fingers right now to sort of brush that off, make it a little smoother, but you will feel a rough sort of texture, and I don't think there's anything much you can do about that. It's not really going to hurt anything, I don't think. It still gives you the impression that you're trying to get. It's going to feel a little textury, I guess. So now I'm grabbing some of my glossy photo card stock. This is the stuff that I use in my printer to print my pictures on. You can see how glossy it is. And we're going to see how it works with this. So I think I'm going to use the same colors, or maybe I'll mix it up a little bit. Pick something else a little different. By the way, that little light you're seeing there is because I'm wearing my glasses to see this, and the lights overhead are shining through my lenses, and that's what's giving that bit of a reflection. I still got to figure out a way to improve my lighting for my videos, but that's just a little aside. So I'm using a blue color. Yeah, lost my top again. And I'm going to enhance my hole a little bit, and doing that with the other bottles too. So I've got a yellow again, and I think that's called rose red, or it might be terracotta. Can't tell. I don't remember. Doesn't really matter because they all come out different anyways. So I'm shaking it on again. Once again, the photo cardstock is dry. I haven't put any water on it. You could spray it beforehand, then drop your crystals on, and you'll get pretty much about the same results. So it's really personal preference. And I'm squirting it, and there we go. Ooh, those are nice colors. That turned out really nice. And you're going to get a little shimmer with this too. Now it seems to, the Brushos seem to react very well to the glossy cardstock, so we're going to give it a bit of a dry here. And the photo cardstock doesn't curl as much. There's a slight bit of warpage, if that's a word, but it's not curling like the other ones did. So that's, I guess, a plus as well. It seems to be drying very well on here. And again, I think you can take your paper towel, you can blot up the color without really making any major movement to the color that's already on there. So again, that's good. So again, great for layering effects with mixed media projects. And we'll just finish off the drying process here. Now here I'm going to try, so I'm just blotting, but you can see the color is not moving. So I'm just getting the excess water up, but the color that's gone onto the card is staying put. Okay, so now I'm going to just compare the different ones that we've done before we move on. So photo glossy, and then we have the cardstock, or was that the shimmer? No, that's the cardstock. These two are the watercolor paper. The black didn't work at all. It was crap, so we threw that away. So those are all seem to work very, very well with the Brushos. And you get a little bit of shimmer when you use the shimmer card. Where did I put that? That's somewhere. I'm looking for that one. But you can see you get shimmer as well with the photo glossy paper. So they all seem to work very, very well. I'm still looking for that shimmer card one. I've got a whole pile of stuff behind me that you can't see, and I've been piling it up as I've been working on this. So it's probably buried under the pile somewhere. Ah, there it is. So that one right now is my favorite out of them all. I just like the way it almost created like a scene. I don't know, have I got too much of an imagination or what? I don't know. But I'm going to stack these up, put them aside, and maybe in a follow-up video I'll show you what I did with each one of these pieces. And of course I've still got my baby wipe there that's all stained, and just a little experiment here. I'm putting some of the dry Brushos right onto the baby wipe. It's slightly damp, but I'm going to give it a little squirt with the spray gun again, with the water, and just see if it mixes it up even more. Kind of a different surface for doing this. It's like dyeing material, I suppose. So there I'm spreading it on. Now it is reacting. It's spreading out, but spreading out very slowly. It's not the same as on the paper, but then I'm just crumpling it all up and running the colors together and see what I get. It's sort of like a form of tie-dye. So you see I got a little bit more color on that. So that could be really interesting too. I'm just thinking ahead here for another experiment with this kind of thing. So let's put that aside to dry, trying some other techniques. So what I'm going to do next is, I don't know what I'm going to do next. This is the problem when I'm doing a voiceover. Okay, this is what I'm doing next. I'm going to try rubber stamping. Now, I've got this big rubber stamp with really open spots, and you see I've got a paintbrush and a palette out and a little cup of water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint with the Brushos, and I'm going to do that with this pattern, this rubber stamped image. Now what I did first was I stamped the image on cardstock with a Versamark ink pad, and then I put on some black embossing powder and heated that. And the idea here is that the color, because it's very fluid, I can keep it a little bit more contained. I'm not a very good colorer, and I don't stay in lines very well. So I'm thinking this might help me stay within the line. Sort of acts as a little barrier around each part of the rubber stamp. That's my theory. That's what we're going to test out. First of all, though, I'm putting some of the dry Brushos crystals into the little palette spots, and I'm just hitting it with a little bit of water. I'm not putting a lot of water in there, just enough to get it runny. And I'm taking a very fine tipped paintbrush, and I'm just going to paint like you would with watercolors. So I'm going to do the yellow first, and I'm going to do the inside of this little flower. And you can see it goes on very much the way watercolor goes on. And just clean my brush here. And I need a paper towel because I want to sort of dry my brush off a little bit. I don't want to contaminate the colors and get mud. So now I'm going to dip it into this darker color. I think that's a purple. And I'm just going around the outside ring. Goes on actually very smoothly, very nice with this. Again, I'm just using ordinary cardstock, so it's absorbing the paint. But because I've put up the barrier with the embossing powder, I'm able to keep things compartmentalized in here. And if you need a little darker color, just go over it again, because it does absorb into the cardstock fairly quickly. So you can build up layers of color. So you want darker color, just add another layer of the Brushos. So I'm going to try the blue now into one of the petals. And as you can see, this is working very nicely for painting. So there's another use for Brushos, not just for backgrounds, but here you can use it as a colorant for your rubber stamps. and it gives it a bit of a watercolor look. Now you see the blue on the second petal is a little darker. Reason being is I think I put more of it on my brush. But that's really not a problem. I mean, I don't mind the petals all being slightly different shades of blue. But if I want to keep them fairly consistent, I can just go back on that lighter one and add another layer of the blue Brushos, and it should darken it up. So this gives you all kinds of possibilities with shading effects. Now I'm not very well versed in shading effects. I've tried to learn, but I have to be in the mood to color, and if I'm not in the mood to color, then I'm really not in the mood to learn how to do shading effects. I know that doesn't sound very good, but that's just me. So although I might go back and review some videos about coloring and shading effects now that I see how well the Brushos work in this method. So I'm going to add a little yellow into that little fine area. It's hard to see on the video, but it's a little fine area just at the top of each of the petals. And this is where I should have used a little smaller tip brush at this point, because my yellow has run over into the blue part of the petal. But you want to know something? I don't mind that effect. It's turned it to a sort of a light green color, because yellow and blue mixed together do give you green. And I kind of like the effect. So I'm actually purposely now doing that on each one of the petals. And it's kind of a gradient. It runs down. The video is probably not picking that up very clearly, but it's kind of neat. You know, you'd almost think I knew what I was doing when I did this, but I didn't. And if you believe that I did know, then you'll also know that I'm full of crap. Okay, using that word a lot. So not bad. This is looking pretty good. Now, I'm not going to sit here and do the whole thing for this demonstration, but now I'll give it a dry. And of course, the paper does warp as well with this. And in fact, it warps quite a bit, as you're going to see a little bit further on here in the video, because I'm really using a lot of water on it. Now, I get this idea. All right, if I can paint in here, but let's say I don't want to paint. Will the embossing powder act like a resist? So that's what I'm going to try to do next. I'm going to take those same colors and the paintbrush, wet it across the bottom, and just do sort of gradient streaks with it. And then I'm going to take a paper towel and wipe it off. And my theory here is the parts that have the embossing powder on it will come clean, and the color will be left behind in the parts that don't have embossing powder. Nor that stupid little swatch that just dropped off the bottle. So I'm putting on some of the yellow. I'm doing this with the dry, and I'm taking another color. I was going to use the same three colors I used a moment ago, but I'm figuring out what the heck, just mix it up a little bit. After all, this is just an experimental piece. So I'm putting some more color on, a different color, and I'm giving it a squirt, just like we've done before, so you can see my colors starting to run. Now I've got it fairly juicy, and I'm actually letting the color run all over it, and this is turning into crap. Okay, so I'm going to try to wipe it off. I'm blotting it first, and it is picking up some of the color, but really it's not doing much for the overall piece here. So I'm going to give it a dry and see what happens when I dry it. Now you can see the color on this is not as brilliant as when I was painting it. That might be just because of the amount of Brushos crystals that I put onto the paper. I don't know, but really look how the paper got really wet, and it's just wrinkling all to pieces here, and the paper's sort of pilling as well. I've really kind of ruined this. I started it out well, and if I continued using the brush to paint with it, I think the final product would have been worthwhile, but I've wrecked it with the other, so it's now crap. Now on this particular piece, what I did was I used the same rubber stamp, and I used the Versamark, and I just laid down the stamp using nothing but the Versamark. So there isn't any embossing powder on this or nothing. It's just dried Versamark ink. And my idea here is, will the Versamark ink act as a resist? So I'm just going over it in color to see what'll happen. And I'm just using the same colors that I had in my palette from the last sample. And it's not looking very promising, as you can tell. It's a real bunch of scribbly little colors. So I'm grabbing a baby wipe, and you know that thing we figured out earlier where the paint doesn't really, or the Brushos really don't move once they're on the card? Well, this is one time when I kind of wanted it to move, and it doesn't. So I'm going to just carry on here. I'm taking a little bit more of this color, and I really don't know what I'm doing right now. I'm just mucking about, just playing around, and I think I'm making crap. Remember, crap is creative recreation and play. So I'm being very creative, I'm playing about, and yeah, the final product here though, I think, is a piece of crap. Now you can see a little bit of the Versamark if you look very, very carefully. I'll hold it up to the camera a little bit so you can get a better look, but really, no. So I tried drying it, see if that'll bring it out more, but nope, this did not work. So Versamark will not work as a resist with brushes. And actually, in this last little bit of the video, as far as using Brushos using a resist technique, I don't think it's going to work. But then I got thinking, well, okay, maybe the Versamark ink is absorbing color, but maybe if I use a white wax crayon, actually put wax down, will that act as more of a resist because wax repels water? So I'm just drawing a really simple little flower on this cardstock, and a stem and a couple of leaves. I don't draw flowers well. Can't see it right there now because it's a white crayon, but now I'm going to take a little bit of the Brushos, I'm going to put a little bit more into the palette, spritz it with the water to get it activated, and use my brush, and I'm just going to go all over where I put the wax crayon and around to see if the image will emerge. And yes, it does. It does emerge. You can see the flower coming up with this. Now, I'm thinking this might have possibilities if you were to be a little bit more careful, a little bit more planned out with the white crayon, what you're going to draw. And you could maybe even do it with a stencil. Trace the stencil parts with a white wax crayon, and you might get a really kind of a neat pattern that emerges. Now you could probably do it with colored crayons as well. They're all wax crayons, so they'll all repel the water. It'll be a resist, and you'd have color then, as opposed to just the white showing up. So there's something for, I didn't do it in this video, but that's something else that I just thought of that might be worth a try. But as far as Versamark, no go on that. So let's move on to something else and try another experiment here. Okay, I saw this on YouTube, and I've seen it with other medium forms where they use saran wrap, and they actually, what they usually do is they put acrylic paint onto their paper or onto a canvas or canvas board, and then they lay a piece of plastic wrap on top of it and scrunch it all up like I'm doing now, and then let it dry. And then after it's dry, they kind of pull the saran wrap off, and you get this really neat textured effect. Well, I'm thinking, what if I do this sort of in reverse? I've got my plastic wrap on my non-stick craft sheet, and I've crinkled it all up with my fingers, and now I'm going to take some of the dry Brushos crystals, and I'm just going to shake them randomly all over it. Those bloody swatches. Just like I was putting it on a piece of cardstock. And I'm going to use a couple of different colors. Find another color here. I need to buy more colors of this. I find that the palette I have somewhat limiting. So I'm putting on something else. I think that's a bit of a green-ish color. Yeah, and there's some red or whatever, and there's yellow coming up, and whatever colors. I mean, it's hard to tell. You never know what you're going to get. Now I'm going to try it with a tag. So I'm putting a tag in, and I've pushed the tag down, and I'm sort of pushing it into the plastic to see what happens. And lo and behold, a mess. Well, it's not a complete disaster. I mean, you could dry that layer, do it again. It's not unlike, though, doing the dip technique that I did at the very beginning of this video. I'm I'm trying now, I push the tag into it and I'm putting a little heat on the back of it just to see if that will help the Brushos absorb a little bit more, but I don't really know what I'm doing when I do this. So here it goes. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, got a little extra sound effect in that. I didn't really need that sound effect. Okay, so I'm just going to talk over that sound effect because I'm trying to turn the thing off. And well, you can see what I'm done with the cards. So, okay, I think I got rid of that. I should have prepared Skype, made sure Skype was turned off before I did this video. Anyways, moving on. Like I said, this is all an experiment. It includes the technique I'm using for creating this. So I'm drawing these off, and you can see you've got kind of an interesting effect, but really, overall, I'm really not impressed with this. Now, maybe if I left the tag sitting on for an hour or two and then peeled it off, well, that's a future one, but we don't have a lot of time today for doing that. So, what are we going to move on to next? What's our next experiment? Well, let's see. Let's get out the stencils. Now, I'm thinking there are two ways to use a stencil. We can place the stencil down on top of the cardstock and throw some Brushos on top of it, spritz it with water, and then pull the stencil off. But the problem is, these are going to be pretty runny. And the Brushos, being in that liquidy form, will probably run underneath the stencil parts, and it'll just smear all over the place. That's a new word too, smear. We'll call that smearing. But I have my handy dandy repositionable spray. Now, I use this on my stencils a lot when I'm adding medium over top of them, just to keep the stencil held down flat on the paper so I don't get seepage underneath. And it works pretty well for that. So I'm just spraying it off camera because I don't want to get it all over my camera. And I'm laying it down and pressing it to the cardstock. So there it's nicely firmly placed on the cardstock. Now I'm going to take the dry Brushos and throw a bit of them on, and then I'm going to activate them with water. So a little bit of blue, and again, got that problem with the hole. I really need something bigger to punch in the holes into these containers, because this is annoying me to no end. Alright, so let's see if I got this to work this time. Here we go. Yeah, that's a little better. I'm getting a little bit more color. Adding another shade of blue. And same problem. Gotta make that hole bigger. And I'm going to drop in some of the red in a moment as well. Okay. Red seems to be coming out. Okay, so now we get out the spritzer. Oh, I guess not. Not yet, we're not. We're going to add more blue to this. So, there we go. I got quite a bit of the Brushos crystals on here. So this could be real runny when I hit it with the spray ball. So I'm spraying it now, spritzing it. You can see they're activating. Now I didn't give it that much water, and I'm actually going to give it a few passes with the heat gun just to give it a little bit of drying time as well before I move that stencil off, because I'm really trying to avoid having any seepage. Now I don't think I can avoid that completely, but we'll see what happens here. So now should be time for the big reveal, and I need a paper towel. I think I'm going to try a little blotting as well. So I'm just blotting up some of the color. And let's pull the stencil off carefully. And not bad. It's got kind of a watercolory effect to it. It's a little hazy. It's not very finely detailed, but that's okay. If this was going to be a background for something, actually I'm kind of liking that. So I don't think that's a piece of crap. I think that actually worked. But now my next experiment has to do with the residue that's left on the stencil. And I'm sure you've seen this technique before where people have used acrylic paints or Delusions paints or whatever through a stencil, and then they flip the stencil over and just press it into another blank piece of paper or tag to get a secondary print. It's kind of like monoprinting, but with a stencil. So I'm just going to reactivate the leftover Brushos on that by squirting onto the stencil, and I'm going to lay the card on top of it this time, because if I pick up the stencil, it's just all the colors are just going to run. So I'm rubbing the card down into, and it's a bit messier, but not bad. It's kind of a cool background. So I'm going to pick up some more residue with the tag, waste not, want not. See how this works, sort of a secondary print. Didn't get as much because there's not as much left on there, but that's still something that I'm sure I could work with. So as far as this experiment is concerned, I think actually it worked pretty well. So I'm just cleaning up here. And the one thing about stencils, you can see that mine are very well loved, and I don't really clean them up that much. So there is some residue of acrylic paints on that. And now I'm just going to dry these two cards off very quickly. Just something about the stencils and Brushos as well. The Brushos will dry on the stencil, but the stencil is a polymer or a plastic. And I think if you use that stencil again with something that's wet, it might reactivate the Brushos on it, because it's basically a non-porous surface, so there's no place for the Brushos to really absorb into like on the paper. So just a word of advice, I think wiping them off after you've used, otherwise you're going to get some contamination from the Brusho colors into the next medium you use with your stencils. Whereas when you use acrylic paint with them, that doesn't happen, because acrylic paint is permanent once it dries on whatever surface it's on. Okay, so for our next experiment, what am I going to do? Well, I've got a piece of acetate. It's hard to see it in this camera, but I just took a piece of heat-resistant acetate. I'm using the type that you would put through a laser printer, the type of printer that uses heat to transfer toner onto pages. So these are the ones that are made especially for laser printers. And the reason I'm using heat-resistant ones is because when I hit it with the heat gun, I don't want it to melt. So now I'm just doing the same technique as I've done with the papers. I'm just putting dry crystals on, and then I'm spritzing it with water. Spritzing. I like to make up language. And there we go. So now I'm taking the heat gun and I'm drying it. This is a really, really glossy surface. It's definitely non-porous, so I'm thinking that even by drying the Brushos, they are still going to just wash off. But I'm trying here, and I've got a lot of pooling happening. Not easy to see it in the video, but you see that they're not really drying. More or less the water's kind of evaporating from it and just leaving the leftover Brushos on the surface. But they're not really sticking, I don't think, to the surface. But I'll give it a good go here with the dryer, with the heat gun, and see if this will actually stick. Now you can see it's pooling at the edges, so I'm going to take a paper towel and do a little blotting. But look, you can see as I blot it, it's picking up the color right off the acetate. So really, no. And the stuff that's left on there is kind of sticky and granular, and it's really smudged. Really, this looks like crap. So I don't think that's really working. But then I got the idea to try something else. So I'm using the same piece of acetate. Well, here I'm putting some white on the background of it just to show you what it looks like. And, well, I don't know. I don't think it's really worth the effort. Maybe you could play around with it. Maybe you'd get better coverage. Now, if you use those acetate sheets that have the rough side on them that are meant for inkjet printers, they're formulated so the ink has a place to dry. This might work on those all right as well. If you put it on the rough side of that and then flip it over, now that might look pretty good. And I had some of those, but I didn't think of that idea until now when I'm doing the voiceover. So then I get this idea. I've got this big bottle of 99% rubbing alcohol. And I'm thinking, okay, I've been using water with Brushos. What happens if I use rubbing alcohol with Brushos? And what happens if I use rubbing alcohol with Brushos on acetate? Because the rubbing alcohol will evaporate much quicker. So my idea here is that maybe the color will stay more. I have no idea what's going to happen, so here I am. I'm spritzing it with the rubbing alcohol. And the Brushos are reacting to it. They are running. They're not running as much as they do with water, but they are running. Now I used a little bit darker colors here so it shows up a little bit more, and I also still have it sitting on top of that white piece of cardstock so you can see it in the video. So I'm hitting it with the heat gun, and essentially what's happening is I'm getting high on the fumes. Well, no, but you could, because as the heat hits the alcohol is evaporating and it's going right up my nose. So I'm giving that a dry, and I'm going to see, does this stick? And I'm not quite done enough drying yet. So I'm still letting it have some heat. And I'm being very thorough on this one because I want to give it a real good shot at being dry before I test it out. Now I'm touching it, and it's not really rubbing off. No. So that does work. The rubbing alcohol does work. But will it be permanent? Now let's see, I'm going to add some more color on here just to see if I can make this a little bit more filled in. More rubbing alcohol. Now the rubbing alcohol did reactivate the dried Brushos that were already on the card. So there's something to be aware of. And again, I'm giving it a really thorough dry. Getting a little high as I do this because the alcohol is going up my nose. So you might want to do this in a fairly well ventilated area. And I'm just testing it to see if it's sticking. And for the most part, it does seem to be sticking. So I'm going to try to take a baby wipe to it. Oh, no. Things were good until then. Yeah, the baby wipe is just taking it right off. Right off. So if you were going to do this technique and you really wanted the acetate, I think what you'd have to do is after you've dried it really, really well, I think you need to some sort of clear coat of some kind of spray, the kind of thing artists use on canvases and things like that when they've used pastels or whatever. And then that might have the potential. Nothing worse than giving somebody a card with acetate on it, they take it out in the rain, and their card disappears. Okay, this last technique that I'm showing you here, well, I don't think it's quite the last one, but one of the techniques, I did this off camera because this took a little longer. What I did was I took a piece of white cardstock, added the Brushos, spritzed it with water, moved it around, dried it. Then I grabbed an embossing folder, the type of thing, you know, that'll leave impressions into your paper. And this is the one that I use. This one's sort of a floral kind of effect. And I took the background piece that I created with the Brushos and I put it into the embossing folder, and I ran the embossing folder through my die cutting machine. So I had a nice embossed pattern on top of it. Then what I did was I took a Versamark ink pad and I patted it all along the raised parts of the embossing texture. And then I took some gold embossing powder, sprinkled it on the top of this, knocked off the excess, hit it with the heat gun to melt it, and this is what I get. And look, you get a lot of shimmer. This, I thought, came out stunning. The only thing I'm a little concerned about is I also got some of the embossing powder and it stuck to parts that did not, that were not raised. Although I don't think it really affected the overall look. I think if I was going to do this again, and I am going to do this again, I think what I would do is I would go over the whole thing before I lay down the Versamark ink with an anti-static pad and see if that would help. But it may be too that it's not raised just high enough and I'm getting some Versamark on the flat areas as well. So maybe if I was a little bit more careful with the way I put the Versamark on, I could avoid that. But overall, I really like the effect. I think it adds a little shimmer to it and bling. So in fact, when I did this the first time, that's why I matted it and made it into a card. Because I really liked this. So, we're not quite done our experimentation here yet. I want to move on to something else. So now let's do some more stencil work, but let's get out the texture paste or modeling paste, whatever you want to call it. I'm using the Ranger texture paste and I'm using the gloss. Now the reason I'm using the gloss is I'm thinking again about a resist technique. If I put the gloss texture paste through a stencil, let it dry, then it's going to be a little bit on the shiny side. Then I'm going to put down the Brushos, hit it with the water, and then I'm going to sort of dab it up with a paper towel and maybe even go over it with a baby wipe. And the parts that have the embossing paste on them should repel the Brushos as a resist, and all the areas that don't have any texture paste will be filled in by the Brushos. That's my theory. So here's what I'm doing. I'm spreading on the glossy texture paste, and I'm not putting it on very thick. I'm just enough to fill in the area, and I didn't do the entire card because this is an experiment. I just want to see what will happen. Now you'll notice it turned out yellow. Reason being is, remember when I said I don't clean off my stencils very well? Well, I probably used some distress ink on this stencil at one point in time, and that's the residue from it. And of course, distress inks, when anything wet hits them, they reactivate. So I've picked up that color in the texture paste when I put it through the stencil. But I'm not going to worry about that. That's just there. All I'm interested in is to see if this is going to work as a resist. If I was to do this and I was concerned about picking up any other color, I would make sure I'd cleaned off my stencil really, really well before I did this technique. Now the other thing that I got thinking about is texture pastes are usually white. Why not change the color by adding some dry Brusho crystals right to the texture paste? So that's what I'm doing. I'm just going to put in a little purple. I'm not putting that much in. And I'm going to work it into this with my palette knife. I'm not adding any water because I think it's already wet enough, and there should be enough moisture in the texture paste to activate the Brusho, and I'm right, it does. And you can see the more that I mix that around, the deeper the purple is becoming. I kind of like this shade, really. Reminds me of that gum, Thrills, I guess they used to call them. Purple gum. It tasted like, I don't know what they tasted like. It tastes like perfume to me, like as if I've eaten a lot of perfume. But anyways, that's an aside. So now I'm going to spread it through that same stencil. And so, if anything, you can use Brushos to color your texture paste. But I'm also going to try resist with this as well, the same as I'm going to do with the one at the top. And I'm not putting it on very thick either. This time I am sort of doing the whole card only because I want to use up what I had on the palette, or on the non-stick craft mat. So I'm putting it on and covering up all the white areas and smoothing it out. And the thing about this texture paste is, which is not true with other modeling pastes, is that it's actually been formulated so you can use a heat gun to dry it faster. On other modeling pastes, you may cause the paste to bubble when you hit it with the heat gun. Now, I have used the heat gun on other modeling pastes, and as long as you hold it a fair distance away and you keep it moving, you can avoid the bubbling. Sometimes the bubbling is really a neat effect. So I'm going to cut away from this for a moment because this is where I'm going to heat it up, and I'll come back and show you what I did with it next to test out my resist idea. Okay, so both of these are pretty much dry at this point. And now I'm just going to drop some Brushos right onto the cardstock, putting it on at random. And I think I'm using the crimson this time with it. And I think I decided just to use that one color, and I'm just spritzing it with my water. And now I'm going to wipe it off. So I'm blotting it first, just to see what will happen. And you can see that the texture pasted numbers are sort of emerging from this. So now I'm going to try a baby wipe, and I'm just going to wipe all over it. And actually, it's not bad. There is some bleeding. It did sort of get into the edges of the numbers, but you know, right color combination with this could look really neat as a vintage piece or whatever. So I'm going to hit it a little bit with the heat gun just to dry it off. But actually, that has potential, I think. That wasn't a complete piece of crap. That worked well. So after I get a little bit more heat to this, I'm going to move over to the other piece. Now remember, there's yellow on this one because it picked up the residue of a previous product on that stencil, which I'm really not minding. You know, that's not really bothering me. It's kind of an added bonus. This one I purposely colored the texture paste with the purple Brushos, and I'm just testing it to see how dry it is. And you can see that it's glossy because the light was shining off of it. And I'm just putting my Brushos on, same color, and spritzing it. And I'm putting a fair amount of water on here, I'm keeping it fluid so I can move it around. And now I'm going right to the baby wipe. And yeah, actually, I think that's looking pretty good as well. And the thing here is, you can't see it bleeding. It is bleeding a little bit into the purple numbers, but it's not as obvious as when I use just the plain white. So that's a way to get around that. But really, I think this would work really effectively. I think you can do a lot of things with this. So let's move on here. And I'm just pulling those up, showing you both of these. Now they're not completely dry yet, but for the sake of our demonstration, they're dry enough. And I'm doing a little wipe up here. You can see how messy this actually gets. So once again, I said at the beginning of this video, cover your area well if you don't want anything to get stained. So what I'm doing next is I'm just going to pull up all the pieces and show you what we've done so with all of this. So that was the one that I really liked on the shimmery cardstock. And then that's our very first piece on ordinary white cardstock. Then we have the watercolored on the smooth and then the textured backgrounds of watercolor cardstock. We've got our photo glossy paper. We've got our tags that we dipped and then we schmucked into the plastic wrap, and then we've got our stencil, both the negative and the positive effect, and then our resist technique with white wax crayon, and the one that we tried with the Versamark, and then painting, and then of course the one that I really like the best is the one that I did through the embossing folder. So there you have it. There's Brushos, and this was crap. So stay tuned for my next crap video with some other things. Bye bye. Oh yeah, one more thing. Here's some of my baby wipes. They're semi-dry at the moment. Don't know what I'm going to do with them, but they look like I should do something. Maybe make them into a flower, I don't know, crumple them up, use them on stuff something, I don't know. For that, bye for now.